Hello and welcome. I'm Vanessa Roberts, and today I'm joined by James Bench of Maximus. Welcome, James.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming in today. So James is the Managing Director of Technology Consulting Services at Maximus. He's a smarty on all things data, cloud, application modernization, information management, and agile development, which is perfect since today for Forward Thinking Government Show, we're going to talk about the evolution of data sharing in government. Really kind of the untapped potential, though. So let's jump in. So let's start off really talking about kind of what citizens' expectations are for interacting with the government, and then talk about how that affects data sharing now.
So citizens are really used to interacting with companies through their mobile devices, through the web on a daily basis. So typically the day-to-day interactions with the companies you touch, there's a lot of interactions multiple times a day. And they would like to have that type of access, that type of interactivity, that type of personalization from the federal government, with the caveat, not everybody wants the government to know that much about you. And as far as the data sharing goes today, it's still, for the most part, fairly siloed. There's certain mission problems that data sharing is happening, when it comes to Homeland Security. They have to share a lot of data just to make sure that, we can account for threats. But for a lot of the citizen data, IRS, Health and Human Services, those data don't tend to be shared very often across,
Right.
interagency.
Right. Well, you kind of touched on what is one of the challenges, which is that kind of interagency issue. There's also the intra-agency issue because some of these organizations are so large that the sub-organizations can't even easily share data across the organization. Maybe talk about what are some of the chief challenges that come up when it comes to data sharing in government.
Well, at the heart of the main challenge is really regulatory compliance and and overall data governance as a whole. Different agencies will have various levels of maturity around how far they are along that spectrum. If they're in the early stages or they're not a well-funded agency and they're having to, kind of on a shoestring budget, build a governance policy, it's very hard to put the right controls and processes and, regulatory compliance over the data so that you can be really precise about what is allowed to be shared and what cannot be shared. For the more mature agencies and those that are really on the leading edge, they're really understanding at a very low granularity, like an attribute of data could be the item that is under regulatory control that you can't share. And so they can share everything but that one element of data. For other agencies that are less mature, it's just easier since you don't have that level of maturity and governance and understanding around, how sensitive an element of data is, then you just block sharing the whole thing.
Right. And isn't that, I do too, because there are a lot of agencies in government that have classification levels of their data. It's also a challenge, the idea of how do you isolate what's truly the classified part? How do you, to your point, how do you make available what is the other parts around it that maybe all you need to really improve the decision making, right?
That's right. That's right. So, data exchange standards and compliance, as there are some standards out there, such as NEEM, is an exchange standard that is adopted for quite a few agencies. But really having that one standard, a standard, policies and controls process around the governance and the exchange model would, help create a lot of the maturity to really make that data exchange a little bit easier and then a little bit more fluid between the systems, that they would understand that this element is, means the same thing across.
Right. Do you find that when you're talking with agencies that there's just really a desire to solve this problem, especially because the size of the data stores are really large? So that's another piece of the challenge, right?
Yeah, when it's mission focused, they will, they'll tackle those problems and they will work on them. When there isn't a specific mission example for it, one example would be USA.gov. So USA.gov is the United States portal. I didn't even know about that until fairly recently when I tried to, try to understand, where the data sharing is happening. Because I thought it'd be really convenient if, a person could log into one location and really access all the services they need, see the current statuses of any type of requests that were made, but do it from one location and not have to go anywhere else. That kind of led me to find USA.gov, which is really a portal that helps try to consolidate and help you navigate the federal government services, because it's also hard to tell, what are all of, like, what's available to you.
Right.
That's very difficult. So USA.gov is trying to make that a little bit simpler, but because of the current state of where we're at, it doesn't allow you to do that within that same interface. Like navigate and access all of your services from one location. It just points you to the login page where you have to log into each agency, which has a different interface, different access. So it just helps you navigate the government a little bit better, but it doesn't really give you that. If there was a better exchange model, it would give you that kind of, I can access everything from one location.
Right, it's that idea of having the single front door, but
right.
Once you get in, it's really like you're in a huge department store.
That's
you
right.
might have to go up 10 floors to find what you need.
Yeah.
It's kind of fascinating because I do hear a lot of agencies talking about this idea of the digital front door. Maybe talk about how you're working with agencies and maybe individual organizations to kind of move along that journey to make the step. What are some solutions?
The technical solution seems to be the fairly easier one. There's good practices around, cloud native architectures, microservices, to really create a data services and then put your policy controls on top of the services themselves, and that'll manage the security, the access requests, what information can be exchanged. I honestly feel like that part's the easy part. Right. It's the records management, it's the regulatory policies that need to be adhered to, and enacting those, completely across, an entire, information model. That part is really the hardest one.
And where would you suggest people start? Like, what's the place that people should maybe focus on first, or maybe the first few steps?
So on the spectrum of,
right.
not
there's
mature,
some
very
agencies
mature.
like, let's talk about DoD, like there's JADC2, right?
Right.
They're way down that journey, right?
Right.
That's really what they're trying to do, the normalization of data, get to that place where we can share it across multiple domains, do all that. But then to your point, there's some very small or not even some medium-sized agencies that don't have that budget and have had to struggle.
Right.
So where do those agencies maybe start versus say like, somebody who's doing JADC2?
Right. Usually it's, having a mission, need to, exchange, data between agency and agency, reaching out to their records management and policy teams to make sure that you can define that interface, but knowing what elements you need and who owns what, and then really looking for an exchange model that will set a standard. So if you aren't able to build, a full governance team and, get all of everyone who's required to participate, if you're not able to do that, then really the first step is do a point-to-point data exchange, build something that will scale, and pick an exchange model that will also scale over time.
Right. So let's dig in a little about the technology. You said you feel like that's the easiest part, but maybe do talk about what kind of technologies are being leveraged to kind of promote data interoperability, and for maybe some agencies that haven't gotten that far down the road and want to understand it a little more.
Yeah, the best ones, and it is used, I would say, commercially. It's pretty much, we're all using it behind the scenes, but really treating really a lot of your data assets, putting, APIs around them. So because that allows you to, if you develop it on a microservices architecture, it will allow you to scale depending on how many requests are needed, over time, like how often is that data being pulled. It's a fairly standard development framework, so it's very easy to adopt. A lot of even COTS applications or systems, it's fairly easy to build into API models to pull exchange data. And then, putting it as cloud native, again, for a lot of scalability and processes. Any streaming or, like Lambda functions in AWS or Kafka streaming, any of those types of services will really help, kind of the technical exchange of information. Strong metadata models is a little bit more of a challenge. It's not a really good, I think, standard technology that I've seen. And then around enforcing policy and regulatory rules, that really ends up having to be coded in,
right?
Unfortunately.
Maybe talk too about what is the alignment with ensuring the data, security, because that's the other factor, right? I mean, yes, you can share it, but there's also, you have to protect it when it's not moving around, when it's moving around, when it's coming up and down from the cloud, where it is in the cloud, right? The government has some standards around the cloud and security, but as we all know, that's not enough just the baseline of FedRAMP, but talk about that a little bit.
There, blockchain was really a hot topic a while ago, and that would have, had that been more adopted, it's really kind of faded out a little bit from the news cycle and even usability. But the idea there, at the time was, if I used the blockchain technology, I could actually track my data and I could see everywhere it's being used.
Right.
Fantastic idea. It didn't really get the lift, over the last few years that it should have. So that seems to be a fairly underutilized capability. Outside of that, it becomes hard to track your lineage of data. So when you look at just, finding out where my data went and where, that's very difficult right now. But as far as security between exchanges, there's very strong security models and encryption models that are baked into pretty much most tools and technologies right now, and it's pretty much standardized. And then in the government, to even get your authorization, to be compliant, it has to meet those standards. So there is a set of standards right now that makes it secure as far as the exchanging of data and storing.
That idea that you could track is the idea of blockchain. Blockchain was everywhere for a while. Like you couldn't pick up any kind of technology publication or open any kind of website. It was there, you're right.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting because if you think about it, it's almost the same idea as supply chain risk management. It's just like for the elements that are moving in transit, right?
That's right. When that was becoming like a popular concept, the idea of, hey, I want to have a universal identity for myself, and I want to be able to use that identity, everywhere in the government, commercially, et cetera. That's my unique identifier. There was a time when the idea of like, where does my data go? And blockchain was meant to be able to track that. So it was meant to be the lift to enable it, and then it's really just lost.
Right. Well, maybe it'll resurge. Maybe it'll come
possibly.
back. Doesn't seem likely, but it is kind of a cool idea how that could work together.
Right.
Let's also talk about AI. I mean, artificial intelligence. You can't. That's the new blockchain, I guess,
That's
right? That's today's blockchain. We can't get away from it.
Yeah.
And talk about that and advanced analytics. Maybe how people are going to use large language models, and what the opportunities are there.
Honestly, it's still even though data mining AI has pretty much been around for like 60, 70 years.
Right.
As it's kind of matured with computational power right now, there really isn't a lot of, there's really not a lot of limits. It's really creativity is going to be the limiting factor. But when we're putting it in the lens of data interoperability, I mean, AI could really help enforce those policy rules, help you navigate complex data elements, help classify them for you. So where we mentioned earlier where different maturity levels for organizations around compliance rules or governance, really, I mean, there's a world where the AI models can actually understand your regulatory controls and rules and really create the policies and interfaces that would pretty much just make that available. So it would take an agency that basically isn't far along on that journey and really put them close to the high end with not a ton of effort.
What do you think are the limitations that should be put around that, maybe, or maybe not limitations, but maybe the guardrails? What types of guardrails are maybe unique for when you're thinking about data sharing and use of AI than maybe some other uses of AI? To your point, like there's automation types of AI, business analytics, BI. That stuff has been done for a long time. Right. But maybe talk about this more forward-thinking idea of using AI with cloud native for data sharing.
So when every ChatGPT cycle, the Gemini, all of these large language models, these generative models, they've been trained on scraping the internet, pretty much accessing everything, and the risk there is putting that on top of any type of agency data is once it's in the model and been used for training the model, you can't peel it back. Right. So right now, a lot of the services are actually to take the language model that has been developed over all of that all of that training data, and then really just use it on top of your own segmented, controlled data sets. Right. And then you just interact with that model in that safe controlled environment. So it limits how much data is being accessed or shared across.
Right. And have you worked with any agencies doing that yet? I'm just curious, like if you can talk about that.
Yeah, can't talk about it too much, but definitely POCs are happening, all the time.
Yeah. I feel like there's sandbox things that are going around that. Definitely the national labs are looking at those type of things and have been for some time. And every lab has its own flavor of AI research that they're doing.
Yes.
So it is kind of an interesting area to see. And you definitely hear, you would think that the size of some of the data stores in the federal government make what you're talking about possible. It's less possible if your amount of data isn't very large, which I guess with some research would be hard. So, some cancer research might only have a small field of data. That makes it a little trickier to apply that approach, right?
No.
Okay.
It doesn't really matter the size of data that you have. The language model has to be trained on, I'm talking language models just because that's the hot topic,
Right.
but the language model is trained on, vast, enormous amounts of data. But when it comes to, using the model, once the model's been trained, you can use that on smaller sets.
Okay.
So it doesn't require retraining. It's the training portion that requires the most amount of data. But once you point it to, a smaller subset, that model is reusable. So a lot of the open source models, even Facebook created, those are available to you. You can just use it and just use it on your localized smaller data set, and it would be just as effective.
And then how do you manage using it then once you have it like that and you want to start using that and share that data across domains? Are there challenges there?
It gets pretty, that part, we're on the absolute early end of that because there's the data that was used, that it's using to help generate a result set. That result set, what is allowed to be shared once that's created, there's
we're not there
clear
yet.
rules yet.
We're not there yet.
Yeah. So most people just don't share that.
Right. Well, that's been super fascinating. It's actually interesting to think about like where that can go next and how that can help with data sharing and how it can help with solving huge challenges that the government has. In the last few minutes we have left, maybe if there's some specific examples of projects you've worked on that you thought were really cool and that you think might be helpful or insightful to other agencies who are looking to do some of these kind of data sharing things and move a little more towards the edge.
One agency that's fairly leading edge in overall cloud native technologies, the adoption of AI. USCIS Immigration Services, we were working on a person-centric model, so really taking all of the different immigrant, information, and then actually trying to consolidate it to who's the person, and that was really as a drive to really understand, like when you're adjudicating, immigration requests or anything that you're needing, you can just do it from the sake of I understood everything that person did over the course of time, instead of treating it as an individual case, and then to decide should I approve, or not approve it. Then I have to log in each and every system. Hopefully, I can find that person because the names might be spelled differently, social security numbers might be slightly off. The addresses could have been changed, but using AM and ML models to actually create a person-centric approach, and then using that as a data exchange to Customs and Border Patrol as the internet. So that's kind of one example that we were working on that.
Right. Did they see the time shrink in the ability of being able to do what they had previously done, just like even in a test environment?
Yeah, I mean, it is public that the case backlog has grown really challenging. So actually, kind of addressing, requests for immigration services, that time has, grown quite large. So the adoption of AI and leveraging a lot of the data that they had available to them and using interagency data as well was a way to really speed up the adjudication process.
I also wonder if, and maybe this wasn't part of looking at it, but it allows you to think about your processes in a different way for sure, right? Because you can suddenly see a lot more across multiple different cases in this instance where where lags happen, right?
Yep.
Or where they don't happen, right? So maybe that helps you address that, which is ultimately, yes, we want to get to decisions faster, and so there's that goal there, but you also want to improve your processes continually over time. And I would think in the long term, that's the big ROI number, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it really will speed things up. It helps you, identify where the next, where the backlog starts to slow down in the process. There's a set of processes that happen. And you can start addressing them, each step individually and then all together. And a lot of these, those steps, for the most part, there's a lot that can, be leveraged in using AI, trained on your data and actually executing on your data. But what it really helps is the workforce, augmentation.
Right.
It's not taking away jobs as much as it's allowing you to handle the workload that's
Right.
coming.
Or do other things that the agency wants to do, expand your mission or change your mission
That's
based
right.
on what the need is. It's pretty exciting. It's pretty exciting, honestly.
It's fun.
Well, I really want to thank you. It was great to talk to you today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm Vanessa Roberts, and I've been talking with James Bench, the Managing Director of Technology Consulting Services at Maximus. To learn more about how your organization can drive digital transformation and improve data sharing across the enterprise, go to maximus.com. You can also visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Maximus. Have a great day, and see you soon on Federal News Network.